In August 1945, stored inside two American B-29 bomber aircraft were the largest weapons of mass destruction ever created. On August 6th, the first was dropped on the island of Hiroshima, Japan. 3 days later, on August 9th, another was dropped on the island of Nagasaki, shaking the world and killing an extraordinary number of civilians and ending the war between the two countries. The events leading up to this historic event and the results of these decisions are felt even today with lasting effects in culture, politics, and war.
On December 7, 1941, fearing American engagement in Japan's expanding Indo-Chinese conquest, the Imperial Japanese Navy engaged in a surprise aerial strike on the island of Pearl Harbor, which hosted an American naval base with a large bulk of the United States Air and Naval Force. This surprise attack on the United States soil resulted in the death of 2,403 civilians and the destruction of nearly all of the U.S. naval military capacity. The President of the United States during the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was committed to defending the United States from another attack. On December 8, 1941, FDR delivered a speech to Congress, urging the United States to declare war on Japan. That is the moment the U.S. entered World War II.
Here is President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's speech.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold, and the end is not yet. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction to supplement the growing power of our armed forces. In their present form, these bombs are now in production, and even more powerful forms are in development. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East. We are now prepared to destroy more rapidly and completely every productive enterprise the Japanese have in any city. We shall destroy their docks, their factories, and their communications. Let there be no mistake. We shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war. It was to spare the Japanese people from utter destruction that the ultimatum of July the 26th was issued at Potsdam. Their leaders promptly rejected that ultimatum. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. Behind this air attack will follow sea and land forces in such numbers and power as they have not yet seen, and with the fighting skill of which they are already well aware. We have spent more than $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won. But the greatest marvel is not the size of the enterprise, its secrecy, or its cost, but the achievement of scientific brains in making it.
In just 6 short months, with its enormous industrial capability, the United States rebuilt its naval fleet with a more modern and robust fleet, capable of taking on the Imperial Japanese Navy, which had expanded its grasp on the Pacific Islands. After many decisive, hard-fought battles and a continuous island-hopping campaign, the United States grew weary of the war and looked to find a method to quickly and efficiently end the conflict.
August 14, 1942, during the peak of the war, the United States began the top-secret Manhattan Project. This was the coding for the classified undertaking of development and the first atomic bomb ever created, and it took as long as 4 years to complete, from 1942 to 1946. With the help of many engineers and nuclear physicists, such as J. Robert Oppenheimer, they were able to achieve their goals and create a weapon capable of destroying entire cities in an instant. It was nothing the world had ever seen before and would exceed all expectations. July 16, 1945, is the day the bomb was first tested. On the salt flats of New Mexico, hundreds of miles away from any civilization, a test bomb, under the name Trinity, was detonated to test the destructive capability of this new weapon they had created. After everyone's hard work, they were finally going to see the outcome. When it was finally detonated, releasing the same energy as 18.6 kilotons of TNT, vaporizing the launch tower and turning the surrounding desert sand to glass in an instant.
As they went deeper into World War II, the U.S. became frustrated with Japan's tenacity and unwillingness to stop fighting. After rejecting the United States' multiple positions for peace, Japan continued on its war path, determined to keep fighting until the end. As the conflict dragged on, American sentiment towards the war in the Pacific grew sour as the battles in Europe began to end and discussions began of whether to drop the bomb or not on Japan and swiftly end the fighting.
August 6, 1945, a fleet of American fighter planes escorting the B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, began flying towards the Pacific Japanese island of Hiroshima, carrying on board the 10,000-pound warhead, the Little Boy. When the bomb was dropped, its explosive power instantly destroyed the city and murdered tens of thousands of Japanese civilians, with the resulting radiation later causing as many as 140,000 deaths afterwards. Not satisfied with their destruction, 3 days later, the United States dropped a second, more powerful bomb on the civilian target of Nagasaki, killing tens of thousands of innocent civilians. Japan, after seeing the destruction that these bombs caused, finally surrendered, officially marking the end of World War II.
Shortly after the end of World War II, the United Nations was formed, and in its first meeting in 1946, the Atomic Energy Commission was formed, seeking to regulate in creating the use of nuclear power, including that of atomic bombs. And other countries saw what destructive weapons the U.S. had, and fearing that they may find themselves on the battle end of these terrors, many found it right to follow in their footsteps and create their own versions of these weapons. Many nations, including France, China, Pakistan, and the Soviet Union, began developing funding projects to advance their nuclear capabilities.
The leaders of this new arms race were the U.S. and the Soviet Union. With their enormous access to resources and their robust spy networks, able to siphon any advancements from each other, they both began advancing their nuclear positions rapidly. The United Nations tried as it could to regulate and control this growth, with little effect.
The U.S. began advancing and testing its weapons regularly in all different kinds of settings. The Bikini Atolls of the Pacific became a regular testing grounds for these weapons, with 24 bombs dropped in the region to both test their capabilities as well as strike fear into anyone willing to compete. The Soviet Union also began its own testing, beginning with smaller, inferior bombs to the U.S., but eventually taking the lead with its development of hydrogen bombs, the biggest of which, Tsar Bomba, had 1,500 times the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The two nations continued to grow their arsenal of atomic weapons, hoping to gain negotiation power on the world stage as they did. But as these collections grew, they both began to grow suspicious of the other, fearing they would use the bombs for war. As the stockpiles grew large enough, the idea of mutually assured destruction began to arise. The idea stated that if either nation attacked on the other, there would be so many nuclear weapons launched at each other that both nations would cease to exist by the time all the weapons landed. This idea served as a deterrent and a fear factor to prevent escalations and direct confrontations. Instead, this led to a series of proxy wars across the globe. These would be wars occurring in nations around the world where the opposing fraction of the conflict were funded by either the United States or the Soviet Union. These battles included the Korean War, Vietnam War, and many others. These indirect conflicts help prevent direct attack on each other from these large nations and stifle hostiles enough to prevent a nuclear war. This series of conflicts and brinkmanship from the two nations became to be known as the Cold War.
These nuclear projects were enormously expensive to undertake for these nations. The cost of the Manhattan Project alone cost the U.S. upwards of $2 billion USD, and trillions more is estimated to have been invested after that. The cost of securing, transporting, and processing these highly unstable materials needed to make these weapons was enormous, and even more cost to ensure it was done safely and securely.
Though no nuclear weapons have been used in armed conflict since the attacks on Japan, the fear of nuclear weapons has still not disappeared today. The Soviet Union has since collapsed on December 25, 1991, which marked the end of the Cold War. But the nuclear weapons remained. Russia retained much of these warheads, but many disappeared and went unaccounted for throughout the world. Many fear these weapons are still operational to this day, and if any conflict should arise, these weapons may become used in a World War III style conflict, opening the doors for the use of the thousands of nuclear weapons held by both the United States and Russia. This war is feared by many to be the most destructive in history due to the potential of nuclear weapons. Due to this fear, many nations are willing to resolve issues diplomatically to prevent escalations to these dangerous heights. As we all understand the dangers of nuclear weapons, see how it has affected so many others in the past.
Over Hiroshima 75 years ago, an event seared into world history, and more so in the mind of Toshiko Tanaka. She was right under that cloud, just 6 years old, and miraculously survived.
I remember the horror of that day, blinding light like thousands of strobe lights, my body thrown to the ground.
At 81, she says she's been blessed to live. Her mission now, banning all nuclear weapons.
75 years after surviving the bombing, I'm all the more determined to help rid the world of nuclear arms.
There's many ways to stop these things from happening. You can help.